Okay, guys, so this is a very impromptu live because Mr. and I were having a conversation, and I was like, oh my goodness, we have to discuss this on YouTube because I haven't heard this talked about a lot. I'm sure people have spoken about it, but I personally have not heard any conversations around this. And I titled this, Should Black People Leave Predominantly White Areas? And the reason that this came about is because Mr. was talking about the need to cultivate. Okay, so let's just say this. A lot of his work that he is currently doing is for Black youth in areas where there are high white populations, and maybe the Black population is, 1 or 2%. And so obviously we want to support our people who are in spaces where our children specifically do not encounter successful pro-Black Black people. And so that's predominantly the work that he is doing right now. So he was talking about the need to cultivate Black educators in those spaces, and so that those Black children would have exposure to Black educators. I quickly jumped in and I was like, no, we want Black people to leave those Black areas. And I had my arguments for that, but I will let Mr. start since he's the one he's the one that prompted this. So, babe, can you explain your positioning?
Yeah. So when we're talking about education, and specifically when we're talking about Black males, I mean, we're still hovering around 2% as, Black educators, Black male educators. And, we always have these conversations in education about making sure we diversify the workforce. We go out allegedly to HBCUs. We do all this provocative type of work to get Black educators, hired, specifically in K through 12 spaces. But we never talk about growing our own, or to use the terminology used, cultivating our own at a young age, and kind of, creating this safe space for them to become educators and to really kind of give them the acumen of being surrounded by other Black educators. So, and I hate this quote kind of, but in essence, to be the change that they want to see, but not guilting them to going into a profession because they may have some baggage, right? Because I'm not seeing anyone that looks like them and getting treated the ways in which they get treated in these spaces when there's not a lot of educators or administrators that look like them. So, we always hear this, this school to prison pipeline. Why not have, a school to classroom pipeline? Why not have that conversation and put together some documentation and some action plans to really support our young brothers and sisters to be in front of the classroom and or to be educators. And what I mean by that, I'm not just trying to limit them to traditional classroom spaces. I'm not trying to put them in harm's way. I'm trying to make sure that we have a cadre of Black teachers and or administrators so they could be a safe space, not only for, our babies that are going to these schools, but also the educators. Because I'm not trying to create a space where they're just, a token Black educator and or token Black administrator. And so I think the conversation needs to happen where we are kind of growing our own and making sure we're kind of pushing the envelope and making sure pressure is busting pipes so that we could get us in these classroom spaces. And again, I'm not saying that they should just be relegated to local spaces. I mean, it will be good if they are, because again, in spaces such as these, there are not a lot of us there, but we need to have the conversation. And, Irene was saying that no, they should leave.
No, wait, no, don't say what
Well,
I said.
well, I mean, you said it at the outset, and I'm like, I disagree with that because what we're going to do is have a vicious cycle of people leaving, and there's
No,
going
because
to
if
be.
we're no wait. In fairness, if we're not there, there can be no cycle. So this
Oh,
is my
hold on.
listen.
You know that there's going to be need to grows.
You wait. You
That,
have to let me make my argument before you refute it. This is my perspective, and I think this is especially impactful coming from me because of the demographic of my children. My issue is that whilst I do think we should encourage the Black children that are there to get into education, specifically Black males, because for our children, Black male teachers would be amazing. Um, and I do want positive, obviously, because I support Mr. and his work. I do want children that are in predominantly white areas. We're talking about states where 99% of the population is white or 98% of the population is white. So there are very, very few Black people there. Those children deserve for Black people to go in to recruit them to leave. Okay, let's be clear. To recruit them to get the hell out of those areas. Because the only thing that could be accomplished by encouraging them to stay, even as a beacon of light to other Black people, is going to be the watering down of our bloodline and the creation of mulattoes, quadroons, and octoroons. Now, you guys know, again, this has to mean something coming from me. When we get into those situations, what we should be encouraging Black people to do who are born in states where there is a white population that is so excessive they may barely ever see another Black person, is we should be sending in Black men and women to encourage them to move to places for work and education that are predominantly Black. We should not in any way, shape, or form encourage them to stay for the next generation of Black people, because Black people in areas where they may rarely come in contact with other Blacks almost have no choice but to be alone or to interracially reproduce. And then we get people, and Mr. You can vouch for this. We end up where when we go into these states, because these people are not leaving, the so-called Black population are really octoroons. They're really white for all intensive purposes. They call themselves Black, they identify as Black, but they're not Black. And the only way to stop that would be to go in and snatch our babies out while we can and create opportunities for them outside of these predominantly white states.
Well, there's a couple errors with that assertion. First and foremost, um, you are assuming that a lot of times Black folks, in particular Black males, have, the agency and autonomy to kind of choose where they're being hired, especially when they're being hired at such a low rate. And so oftentimes, especially when we're talking about Black men, they have to go where the opportunities are afforded. And so with that being said, then they have to take their family partners and whomever else, whatever the case may be, along with them. Saying that, those kids, if they're not homeschooled, are going to enter into more than likely the traditional public schools where they're not going to see anybody that resembles them. And so, by your logic, I mean, it's just going to keep having this reification because guess what? You shouldn't stay there. There's no Black folks there. Why are you taking your Black ass there? I mean, essentially that's what you're saying. And I'm like, there's an other end of that argument too, is that there's a lot of, and we know this talking about psychosis, and this probably wouldn't really matter to the adult Black in this case, but a lot of Black people like to be around white folks. I mean, because they always think that white folks' ice is always cooler, so they think this is an upgrade from anything else. However, their babies are still in those systems, educational systems where oftentimes they're being harassed, I mean, physically attacked by these white educators. And they have no allies. And I'm not talking about white allies. I mean, they don't have anybody as far as black educators, administrators, so on and so forth, to advocate for them. So if we keep having this exodus plan for all of our black folks and educators, I mean, the situation is going to be really troublesome for our babies that are in these situations.
But our babies won't be there, babe. That's the thing. Our babies won't be there if the black people leave those areas. The only reason there are black children, and I use black children loosely because you did not affirm what I said, babe, which is that there are very few black children there. There are lots of mixed children, mulattoes, quadroons, octoroons, and so forth. There are very few actually black children there. And so we are talking about, first of all, I think it is realistic if we can train them to want to be black teachers for the sake of black people, we can also encourage and train them to leave predominantly white states and go to places with a higher concentration of black people.
So what about, so yes, there are a lot of mixed children here. They're sprinkled of, black children, but there's also a pretty high concentration of our brothers and sisters from the diaspora that are here. And, we're still all black.
Well,
I mean,
let's talk. Okay, he's saying high concentration, but let's be clear. We're speaking of states with a black population that is less than 5%. So there's no high concentration of anybody. Right, because they're counting people throughout the diaspora when they're counting black population. So yeah, there's no high concentrations of black people.
I'm saying that to say that they still, those, whether you call them quadroon, mixed, our brothers and sisters throughout.
Yeah, octoroon. I mean, that's not black anymore. Those people aren't black.
Okay, so if you're mixed, you're not
black. Now, he and I don't agree on this. He believes mixed people are black. I believe mixed people are half black. And if you're an octoroon or a quadroon, you're not even that. Meghan Markle's baby is a quadroon. That baby is not black. 25% black is not black. Or less, because most mixed kids are not even 50% black. My children aren't 50% black. Do you know what I mean?
So listen, when they see, I'm pretty sure you've seen the movie Imitation of Life. When they see your black parents, you are considered black.
And well, let's be clear.
All of the vitriol, socially black. Everything that society throws at anyone they perceive as black, because now you're considered black.
Wait.
You're going to catch all the hell that everybody else does, unless you're trying to pass and they don't know that you are actually black or have some black in you.
That's disingenuous. So I will agree, and this is what I teach my children, that mixed people are only half black, but that society will view them as black, but they don't get all of the weight of blackness, not even close. The less black they appear, no matter what their parent looks like, the less they have to be concerned about the full impact of blackness. Their impact is measurable to their blackness, which is not fully black. But
that's because of colorism.
Half black or less.
That's because of colorism, and we could delve into racism. Those are real phenomena in society. So yes, that's genuine. That's a thing, right? But again, if you're passing, again, going back to the Imitation Life, and you get found out that I didn't know she was colored, yeah, your world is going to change significantly because now they know that you are black.
But this isn't back in the day. In modern day, mixed people are heralded by most as superior. So, you have white people imitating mixed people, right? You have black people wanting to look more mixed in their phenotype. So this is a new day for mixed people, right? It's cool to be mixed now.
Yeah,
I also just,
I wouldn't argue that, but I'm saying my argument is this: mixed or not, or just black, in these educational spaces, these babies are catching hell because they don't have anyone that that relates to them, someone that can advocate for them. So if we're just, just mass exodus of all our black educators or future educators, and no one is there to really help advocate and support these babies, it's just going to be very, very bad. I mean, it's going to be worse than it already is. And so again, I'm not advocating for, wholesale recruitment of blacks to come to a space you know, that's white. I'm saying the ones that are here, we should be able to grow our own from the ones that are here.
so this is what I would say. I would say that we should be encouraging them to leave. Yes, we can encourage them to be educators, but we need to encourage them to take their degrees, utilize, because in a lot of these states that are predominantly white, they feel guilty, right? And so there are programs for the minuscule Black populations they have. Utilize the programs and leave. Leave the state. If they are leaving, then there are no Black people there for us to worry about. We can go in and do recruitment of the Black people that are there. But the goal is to recruit them to leave. Leave. Don't stay someplace where the population is 95, 96, 97, 98, 99% white. Get out. I would say if the population is anything under 10%, leave. But especially for Black people that are in populations where whites are literally making up 98, 97, 96% of the population. That isn't, we need to be sending Black people in and encouraging those children to leave. If they're leaving, there will be no more Black children there for us to worry about, right? There are states with a 99% white population, 98% white population. Black people don't belong there, and we should not be encouraging them to get degrees to stay there. We should be encouraging them to pick up their families and go. Or we should be encouraging the young people to utilize the services they've made available to their token Blacks and then get out and go somewhere where your people are.
So you're advocating not paying it forward, not looking out for, those who are coming up behind us, like our ancestors have done. They've been in situations where, okay, geographically, it hasn't been the best place. But if we're looking at, laying the foundation, doing what's right, because you're going to get people, regardless of the population, demographics, the percentage, people are going to live there anyway. So if we're actually looking out for the babies, we're going to have to do something for those that are there, because not everybody is going to have this mass exodus. Not everybody is going to get up and say, "Oh, we're leaving."
Well, that's fine. Those people will stay
even though that's how a lot of these states were constructed, right? I mean, they were legally constructed that way to have, sundown towns, to have no Black folks there. All right, I understand that, but again, people are going to move and feel like they should be able to live where they want to live. They're going to feel like they should be able to up and take their family for different opportunities. And of course, I don't agree in this post-racial jargon, but these things are out there, and I just think to limit, because I'm thinking about the babies. If they want to go in a space where they could get, become educators and stay there and have their families, and let's just say for the small percentage of the all Black kids who are here, all right, they could connect with another Black person, and maybe that starts that small cadre and community and population of those. It has to start from.
But we don't want a population of Black people in those places. That's not what we want. I mean, and there's several reasons we don't want this. Number one, because you can attest, babe, because you've done work and do work in these environments, that the Black people that stay breathe themselves out, and that the quote unquote Black children that are there are one admixture away from whiteness. Right?
A lot of
I mean,
that is true. No,
tell the truth.
a lot of
Tell
that
it.
happens. But I'm saying,
But wait. Let me finish though, please, baby. A lot of that happens to where you can have a program for all Black children, and 80-90% of those children can pass as white, right? So I'm not worried about Black people that choose to stay in that situation. The goal should be to pull our people out of those places. We don't need to create Black communities in states that are 95, 96, 97, 98% white. We should not be there. And any Black person that chooses to stay is not personally my concern, because they by the time they have grandkids, those grandkids will not be Black anymore. They will be white effectively. So that's not my problem at that point.
but you're talking about later on. I'm talking about the students, the young brothers and sisters who are in elementary, middle, high school. They don't see any of us. I mean, it's rare. And so I think we could change that. And so you're talking about people who want that are older, you're talking about the later part of their lives. I'm like, okay, yes, you have the opportunity to go wherever you want, because you're just not trying to be this token. But again, not everybody that takes these positions are trying to be, this diversity field. I mean, they're actually trying to do some things to actually impact the Black people that are there, regardless of it being, majority white. They still are trying to do that work to, unify and help Black folks. And I think if we just uproot all of those Black people who are trying to do that work, I think it's going to be more harm than good.
So, Jack and Jackano 80 said, I live in a predominantly white suburban neighborhood for 10 years, never had a problem. We're not talking about neighborhoods. We're talking about states, whole states, where you might have a 5% or 1% or 2% Black population. That's different than a neighborhood, right? Because you can still see Black people if you leave your neighborhood.
But what did they say?
He said, I live in a predominantly white suburban neighborhood for 10 years, never had a problem. I grew up in the hate. I never had a problem, although it's more culturally diverse. Most of my homes have been in master plan communities, white Hispanics and white people. I've never had a problem either, but I lived in a state with a significant Black population. It's not like I never saw other Black people. There are places where you could go days and not see another Black person. That's very different from simply moving to a neighborhood. But I'll also say this, I spoke about later in life, because if you're going into spaces and telling Black children to become educators and stay in these predominantly white areas, these predominantly white states, then they will have to reproduce and marry somebody as adults. And they tend to do that with whites. And so by the time those children that you've convinced to stay for the sake of other Black children have grandchildren, they will no longer be Black people. Those children will be white. So we are literally saying, stay in a space where you can't even find a mate.
Well,
and become obsolete. My argument would be the same thing as you. I want us to have engagement with those children, but the message to be, come with us, leave and come be with us. Come be with your people, leave this place. So I want engagement for those children. I just don't want the ultimate goal of that engagement to be to encourage them to stay somewhere where there are almost no other Black people.
Well, I mean, so that's an argument that can be made, but if you really want to be with a Black person, that's going to happen. So just because you have, multiplicity of white people here that could potentially be your mate, doesn't mean that has to happen. You know, I mean, there's some, I mean, just think of the opposite end of that spectrum. You know, there's some white folks that live in predominantly black areas, right? And that doesn't mean they have to end up mating with a black person. So that you know, that's not a good rationale, a good reason to not attempt to try to help these black babies in these spaces, you know. And what I'm proposing is like, hey, let's inoculate them, let's put them in a space, you know, kind of like my brother Q Butter in his academy, where they're advocating black power, even though it's a space that's all white, but they're doing that in a way that's a little bit more shrewd, right? That they're still getting a point across that they're advocating and supporting these babies in these classrooms. And so I think that can happen. And I think it has been done in other states that are, you know, less diverse. And so I just don't think, you know, this Exodus plan is the best way to go about helping our babies.
Well, I mean, I feel like you're saying that because you're like, nobody will be there for them. I'm saying we can have an active role in going to these places and engaging these children, right? But we should be telling them to leave. That the best place for a Black person is not in a place where there are almost no other Black people.
Well,
we should not be encouraging them to stay in a space where they won't even be able to find a husband or a wife.
Well, here's the thing.
Very white.
Here's the thing with that argument, and I know this for a fact, and I think you probably know this too. Most of the time, you know, especially in education, we tend to gravitate where there's other Black educators there. I mean, that's just simple. You're not the token one there. And so those opportunities can happen, you know, especially when you start getting a cadre of teachers and administrators and everything. And especially if that particular school, you know, although this shouldn't be the case, but if that particular school has a high population of Black students there, then yes, they try to make sure most of the time, well, not most time, some of the time, that the educators match the demographics of the students. And again, there still is a lot of work to be done to make sure that is really truly happening. So these things do happen, but I mean, I'm not saying that these future educators shouldn't have the ability to go other places if it behooves them. But if they would like to stay and really be a part of the change that they want to see, then they should do that. And they should be incentivized to do that if that's the case, right?
Wait, who are they mating with? This is what I'm saying. Like, there's a bigger picture to this, right? When we encourage Black people to stay in areas where there's really no other Black people for them to be with, we are encouraging them to take a part in their erasure, right? Because that Black person will have to marry, they're not going to stay alone for the rest of their life. And most of those people, and you have seen this to be true, most of those people marry white, and then their kids marry white. And then we don't have Black people anymore. So you're concerned about the maintenance of a Black population that will disappear simply due to the fact that there are too few of them for them to maintain any Blackness.
So so yes, there's a dearth of Black people here, right? So there's not a high diversity. But I also have to say, most of the people who get involved with white folks, they really have a proclivity towards them in the first place. So it's not like they just like, oh, that's the only one here. You know, somewhere deep inside them, they really like that particular person anyway. And I know people say, well, love is love, and I need to be with somebody, but the world is a lot smaller now. And if you're an educator, I mean, you could travel to different spaces, you could meet up there, you have breaks. I mean, you could be creative if you want to. And I've seen people do these type of things if they're truly invested in a person that's of their same race. I mean, so this is not, these things are not anomalies. It's not like if they just stay there and they become an educator, they're just going to lose their blackness over a period of time and generations and become octoroons and just become completely a whiteout. That's
Are you saying that's not realistic when you yourself look at that every day?
but I
Like
can
you
look.
are you're a witness that that's exactly what occurs.
But you're making it seem like that's the total sum of what occurs. That
It's
does
the
occur.
majority of what occurs. It's the
No,
majority. Let's
no.
be intellectually honest. It really, there are not more mixed blacks, add mixed blacks there than black people of any part of the diaspora.
So there are a lot of mixed blacks. But what I'm telling
More,
you is
not
that
a lot, more. I want you to tell the truth about this life.
no, okay,
When you
but
engage in your programs, who is the majority representation? Black people or admixed?
no, this definitely majority mixed.
Okay. All right. Everybody heard that. He's going to move on with his point. But because he has boots on the ground, that's why I was surprised. And I was like, we have to take this to YouTube because he knows from having his feet on the ground, managing these programs, that what I'm saying is true.
No, I don't think
No. Okay.
it's not true because I see people, so people see, if you're part of a community or part of a state and everything, and you see things, you believe that it's customary, right? Until you've seen something new. And when you see something different and or new, because there are black couples with black children and everything. Again, now mind you, they're in the minority, but where are we going to
No,
start?
wait, repeat that. They're in the what?
Yeah, they are in the minority, but where are
This
we
is
going to
my
start?
point, babe. They're in the minority. These black people that stay don't produce black people. They produce mixed people who produce octoroons and quadroons. And effectively, those aren't black people anymore.
But
So why would we tell them
that's
to stay when we know in a generation or two they won't be black people anymore? What is the
because
benefit of staying if in 2 generations you don't even have a black person anymore? They've
if that
created a white person at that point.
if that was all of the people, then I would say yes. But that's not the case for all, and we have somebody for our babies. We can't just say, you know what, sucks for you. Y'all chose to move to this lily white state. There's not going to be anybody there for you. I mean that we can't do that. I mean that's just morally wrong.
So I don't understand what the pushback is on why we cannot simply have and hi chaos joined us. I don't understand what the pushback is on not encouraging people to stay, but sending in scouts and recruiters and Black people to engage Black children, but engage them with the message that they should leave and come with us. I don't understand the pushback.
Can I say something to Mr. Minister before you
Oh,
continue?
sure.
Mr. Minister, are you on your phone or are you on your computer, sir? If I may ask.
He's on his computer, but the fan is just loud, so there's no getting around it.
So there's no way he could turn that white screen off?
Oh no, that's just gonna have to stay there, I think. That's just how he chose to do it.
Okay. All right. It looks a little weird, but okay. All right, continue. All right.
No,
Actually,
that's
I do want to say something since I opened my mouth. So what you saying, Irene? You saying that the people that are, let's say, Black with either two Black parents or wherever they choose, that's in a so-called predominant white, suburbs or wherever area they're in,
state,
and
specifically a state. Yes,
state, like a whole state.
Mm-hmm. Like a whole state with maybe 5% or less Black population.
And which states are these? Was that Iowa, Dakota, those type of areas?
I think There's some states upstate that are like that. On the West Coast, Oregon is a lot like that. There are several states that have a white population or black populations that are 4%
Utah,
or less. There are way more states than
Washington
you would
State.
think. Yeah, Washington. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Upstate, like there are more than you would think that have very insignificant black populations. So we're specifically talking about places like that. And Mr. was making the argument that that was by design. I don't know, after Chaos makes his point, Mr., if you could elaborate on that. These states were purposely kept white spaces by law in this country. And I think we should touch on that too, because the black populations that are there are so small because it was designed for it to be um, a state that did not have a black population.
So, all right, I will say this. The biggest question before anything we should always ask is, why are those black people that choose to go to these states that is predominant white and there's only a very small percentage? What is their reason? Because undoubtedly, because I'm not sure if you're still in the West Coast. I'm here in the East Coast, Irene. That if I'm a man or let's say a woman that's either have an understanding of their self or whatever case may, they have a better grasp. Say, if I'm gonna live anywhere, is either where there's more black people than others or a mixed culture, neighborhood. To find that the black people that choose to live in these states that's predominantly white is telling that they really seek out to really erase their blackness, both genetically and all aspects. Because if you live in an environment where it's pretty much white, what's gonna happen? You're gonna associate and procreate the environment you're in. Am I right? By default, right? So really, they want to produce the mixed children, which then the mixed children will go out and eventually procreate with white, and eventually in 2 generations will become white. That's my thing. That's what I say. Anybody want to respond? People.
I think in fairness, some people are born there, right? It's not a choice that they're making. And mobility, especially amongst the poor, is not as easy, which is why it would take some recruitment, and which is why Mr., even though this is arguing against my point, was since there's not always the ability to be mobile, why is it that those people should be penalized for their inability, because there's no guarantee that they're going to get a job or that they're going to be able to move out of those spaces. And that's kind of why you're arguing to support it, right, Mr.? And also, when you address that and what Chaos said, Carl's opinion was saying, and this is an interesting perspective, he said, try this one out. Italians made it in this country when they moved out of Italian neighborhoods, and after they stopped only marrying other Italians. And he cites Brent Staples and a piece that he wrote in the New York Times regarding this. So what do you think about those 3 things? Do you think that Black people moving to these areas is indicative of their desire to erase their Blackness? Do you feel that part of the advancement of a group of people is moving out of those neighborhoods and admixing, as Carl's opinion is suggesting? What do you think about those 2 things, Mr.?
Well, I'm not a big fan of Brent Staples in the first place, but I do feel as though there are some Black folks are moving in these spaces to kind of lessen their Africanity, right? So trying to lessen their Blackness and to be, skinning and grinning around other white folks. I do believe that is a population of Black folks that go to these particular states for that reason. But of course, I think there's another population of Black folks that are going to these states to really, which is my argument, advocate and support, the black brothers and sisters, in particular the babies that are catching hell on a daily basis. And so those individuals are trying to work, even though in these white spaces, analogous to the spook who sat by the door. So, as far as the whitewashing of blackness over time, again, that definitely is a situation that can happen. But if you were raised even in an all white state, but if your family background is like, hey, my mama black, my daddy black, I'm marrying black, if you've been kind of like ingrained, excuse me, with that ideology, you're going to keep it black. There's not going to be a location that's going to change that.
But how do you keep it black with no black people to keep it black with? I mean,
Well,
that's my point. Like, you can't keep it black.
It's counter to what you're saying. You don't want to have any black people there.
No, but I'm saying I do want black people there to visit and to recruit the same way. I mean, you understand the recruitment process, the same way you go and recruit students and teachers from across the state, or from across the country, is the same way that I want to see black people. I want us to go in and encourage and let them know that there are opportunities in our communities outside of those areas. What I don't want is them to stay, because I just don't understand how you can keep it black, marry black, produce black, without other black people to marry and support. The thing is, I don't see adding or telling black people to stay someplace where there are no other black people, basically, or where the black population is predominantly not really black, but octoroon and quadroon and so forth, as helpful for those black people. I dare say those children suffer more being in an area that is 95, 98, that white, than they could ever benefit from. And so, to what Carl's opinion was saying about admixing, I mean, we can say that that is true for the Italians, but the thing about variations of whiteness, and I will argue this too, there is a benefit. And even I've heard a lot of black people say this, there is a benefit to having mixed children. Every black person recognizes that, right? There is a benefit to your child to be mixed, because society is kinder to the mixed child and more accepting of the mixed child. But with that said, I don't think we can compare the movement of black people and admixing of black people to whites of different varieties moving and admixing with each other. I kind of don't think it's necessarily an apples to apples comparison. What were you going to say, Chaos?
You said that's a lie.
I know I said a lie because if you hear the stories, the ones that's countless that come from two different racial parents, you hear the abuse they suffer same way, especially if they're first generation from an admixer. So
well, let's be real, Chaos. You don't think that mixed people are preferred over black people in society? Like, can we be real about this?
I don't know about
mixed people are preferred over full black people by society at large.
Not
even black
time.
people, but most of the time. Like, nothing is true all of the time, but let's be real. There's a reason why both whites and blacks, and I think this is part of the pathology of black people, imitate mixed people. There's a reason why we prefer hair textures and skin colors that are closer to someone who is admixed. There's a reason why white people are more comfortable, or why even Obama was able to get into office. Do you think he would have been there had he not been admixed? There's a reason, right? When we look at Meghan Markle, do you think a person that looked like me or blacker than me, right, would have been marrying into the British royal family? Why is she there? Because she is almost passable, right? So
they did their DNA and found that she's a descendant, some cousin from them. So now they just
okay,
they just let anybody get in there. They have to make sure check out.
are we seriously going to sit here and pretend like society is not more accepting of mixed people, though?
I mean,
We have to be intellectually honest.
Well, I think that was the case, but I think now it's kind of moving towards that not being the case. You take somebody like Serena Williams, who is a chocolate sister, right? Who married a white guy. I mean, so these things are happening a little bit more often where they're not, this mixed hue. And again, I think in the past, yes, people were just like, that was the aesthetic, like, oh, she's mixed with this and that and everything. Now, it could be that way or it cannot be that way. But I think overall, if we're splitting hairs here, I think society still kind of likes, especially if we're talking about mixed with white, because white is always the preferred aesthetic in society, right? But again, there's been some pushback on that narrative.
I want to, Carl's opinion said, Black people are moving, and I'm curious, especially Mr. of yours, and in Chaos, I want you to speak on this too. Carl's opinion said Black people are moving to these low population Black states for the same reason that white people and Latinos are moving there. They discovered oil up in those hills, high gasoline prices, and they create high paying jobs. And I have to say, there's some truth to that. I think Black people do move to these places because you can be tokenized and you have access to jobs and opportunities because you are the diversity. Truth or not truth?
Well, I know Crew, if Crew's on here, he's in Dakota, and he's there because of work and the so-called high wages up there, because Dakota is a cold ass state. So if you go to some place that's predominantly white, obviously they're going to have a sense of resource and income for their wherever living they're trying to achieve. So that might be one reason why they're there. Besides all the other things, not many Black people are going to really just pack up, go to these predominant white states, because Black people over at the end of the day, if it was issue with jobs and finance, then obviously a Black person would research and say, "All right, go to states where there's little of me, but that's where the wages are at." To keep it 100.
Well, I said this before. I mean, so the economic opportunities are very real dynamic, and people do go, Blacks in particular, go where they have an opportunity. Now, the unfortunate part about it is, yes, oftentimes these individuals are tokenized, and oftentimes some of these Black folks do have this, this this internal hatred for themselves, and i.e., they hate other Black folks, so they try to mimic white people. And how can they better do that than being associated and around the majority of white folks, and being the token Black person, and talking badly about other Black people. I mean, so yes, to say that doesn't happen, I mean, we know that those things happen. But I just wouldn't cast the net so widely. I do believe, and I know of these individuals who are in these spaces making a difference for Black people who are really minoritized in these spaces. And, they're doing it, again, I'm going to bring it up, analogous to the spook who sat by the door. So, yes, they're wearing the mask that grins and lies, but they do a lot to help Black folks. And just because they may be in a position that's, paying them well and they're getting treated well, doesn't mean that they're, like what Carter G. Woodson said, they're miseducated Negroes. No, they're there taking their opportunity, and they're doing right by the opportunity, and they're helping other Black people. And that's the thrust of my argument, is that we still need to have some, even in these places and populations where there's few of us there, we need to grow our own, that may want to stay there and become educators, especially Black males, and have them have the opportunity to do that. But again, I'm not saying that they should just be restricted to staying there. They should be able to go where the opportunity is best for them. And if it's here, and if they feel it's here, because they should have a choice of where they want to go. If they want to stay and help, future, young brothers and sisters, they should have that opportunity to do that. And there should be a system that, people who are in spaces like that are helping them navigate in their support system on an ongoing basis. That's the type of structure that we're going to need in order for this to be successful.
I think that Dillard Pat made a good point. And Carl's opinion, I actually agree with you about construction jobs not caring about diversity. And those jobs do pay well. I knew a window installer and he made bank. We're talking the high six figures because the job is extremely difficult and it's very dangerous. And so they pay them really, really, really well. And so I do agree with you there, Carl's opinion. That has been my experience too. But I also feel that like the double-edged sword to that is that for a lot of the more menial tasks, because I did commercial real estate, as you guys know, for a long time. And when we would be bringing buildings up to OSHA standards, I've seen illegals be hired to do things that hazmat teams were supposed to be doing. So I think it kind of can go either way. I've seen both in California, which is where I've had the experience. I've seen it go both ways. I've seen people make bank, like I know Black electricians, things like that, that make money. And I have seen, and like the gentleman that put in windows, he was Hispanic. So I've definitely seen diversity in that field. But also, at least in California, I have seen illegals being brought in and basically doing shoddy work and Band-Aid work. And the East Indians are good for hiring them because they're cheap. So yeah, I would agree that diversity is not the goal. The jobs can be very high paying, but some people do cut corners, and then you get a lot of illegals, which is like a whole other issue. Being hired to do work that normally would go to skilled trade, because a lot of these turnover property people don't want to pay those good wages, right, to skilled workers. So I feel it can kind of go both ways. Dillard Pat brought up a good point because she was saying her husband moved, I think she said, to South Dakota for money and stuff, but basically they chew you up and spit you out. Like they use you up, they get their token or whatever, they use you up, and then it ultimately doesn't end up being lucrative at the end. And I think that's often the case when you're being petted by somebody, where there's a short-term benefit and people do follow the money. But this brings me back to something that I was about to get into when I was like, no, let's take it to YouTube. This brings me back to a point that I wanted to make to Mr., which is that part of the situation is that not offer the same sort of great opportunities that other communities can offer. So then that's where it becomes a labor of love, because we cannot compete with companies and schools and, institutions that are wanting to recruit, especially now the popular thing is diversity. Dr. D and I were talking about this, and I tried to get her to come over for this, but I think it's pretty late where she is. It's difficult to get people to overlook self-advancement for the greater good. And I also think that it, even from a pragmatic standpoint, makes more sense for an exodus because of the fact that we have areas that are predominantly Black where Black students still don't have Black teachers. So what is more important? To reach the one Black child that might be in an entire school district, or the 4 Black children that might be in the entire school district, or to reach schools that are packed tight with Black children and putting quality Black teachers there?
So here's what I'll say to that. This grow your own model that we're talking about shouldn't be monopolized in spaces where there's not a high diversity or it's not a high percentage of Black African American folks there. This particular model should be really happening in those spaces that you just talked about. So I would advocate for the same thing that I'm advocating in these spaces where there's less Black folks to be tried and implemented there. And so that, the same thing we're talking about, I'm just not trying to be Captain Save a White Bro. That's not what this is about. This is ultimately about our babies that are in these spaces, regardless if they're in, high white spaces or if they're in Black spaces. They still need an educational pipeline where we're getting teachers in front of them. So I don't think it's fair in a place where it's more diverse, where you could have a much higher pipeline if you're growing your own in that particular state, and then to take it away from a state that has less, where they're trying to grow their own, and you say, hey, we have more here, so we're going to take your own. I mean, really? So we're going to have this in-house fighting amongst Black folks? Now, if they chose to do that again, that's all well and good. They should have the opportunity to go where they feel the best opportunity is. I'm going to say that over and over again. But again, I don't think we should just look at our babies here as just sacrificial lambs. Like, okay, they're just, there for the slaughter. They shouldn't be there anyway. I just disagree with that assertion.
But that brings me back to my original point, which is that, like, I hear what you're saying, but when you look at these areas, when we look at what we know, right, is that the Black people in these environments are heavily integrationist in their attitude, and that extends to their bedroom, and that the quote unquote Black people that are in these areas are actually mulattoes, at best mulattoes, octoroons and quadroons, to the tune of, I mean, you tell me, baby, to the tune of what, 80%, 90%? Like that's truth, right? So then what are we talking at this point? What are we saying what are we preserving at this point in those spaces? What are we creating? We're not creating anything for the Black community at large. At best, we're creating the destruction of the few Black people that are there.
Well, I do understand, like, if we're talking about just a little bit numbers, there should be some sacrifice at some point. But again, we're talking about, not just a minuscule amount of babies that need us in these spaces. They need us. And so I'm just not going to sacrifice all these babies to say, oh, well, again, to me, it seems like you shouldn't be there and you should just exit there. I mean, there's always going to be this interest convergence where white folks are going to say, hey, yeah, come here. And they're going to tokenize you, right? And they're going to use you up and spit you out. But we have to be smart enough to know that these things are coming, so we could, utilize our resources, get as much as we can get, help as many Black babies as we can help while we're here, because ultimately we know these things are going to happen, and so we can help as many people as we're there, create a pipeline for them if they want to stay there or go to other places. But again, I'm just not with, having them, just have this major exit plan. In addition to that, I think, you said, how do we create this Black space? You surround them with other Black people. You take them to other places and then you bring them back, but you kind of like have this inoculation around them, like, hey, this is what we're about. This is what we're going to do. Everybody might not be cut out for this. you know, if we're trying to keep it, you know, within this realm. And I don't know about any exclusionary things, because what if somebody is mixed or anything like that? Does that mean that they shouldn't be part of an educator? You know, they shouldn't be an educator because of that, because they may have the proclivity of hiring another mixed person, and that's going to dissipate the black pool. I mean,
Well, no, that's not fair. First of all, everybody knows my children are mixed, right? And mixed people are part black. But I just want to say this. The thing is that if we have mixed children, ideally we would want to see them marry black, right? But in a space with no other black people, and with mixed people already having the propensity to marry white or non-black, we aren't preserving anything. There's nothing to be preserved. It's already an uphill battle to get them to marry black anyway.
But why
But
should
if
they?
but that happens
black
everywhere, though.
people,
I mean, yeah, it has a so the proclivity of it happening more in places where there's not a lot of black people. I get it, but that could be just based on somebody's, you know, their bias, the ways in which they view other people, aesthetics, and everything. I mean, black people do that in highly diverse spaces. So I think just to say, you know, it's going to happen more so in here. Yeah,
oh,
it could, but then it couldn't.
whoa. There's not, in the average school, in the average environment, the black population is not like 70-80% mixed. So there is a greater likelihood it happens in predominantly white states, because the black populations in those states are predominantly admixed. They're not predominantly black. Those children are not predominantly black. They're predominantly mixed. So to say that it doesn't happen more there, I think is disingenuous. I do want to go to a couple. Go ahead, Chaos, and then I want to read a couple.
I didn't say it happened and it happened more there. I said that it could happen in other states too,
But
because
not to
somebody
that
could have a
degree.
no. What I'm saying is, we know people in California and other states that are way more diverse. They have a proclivity toward a certain type of person. So it doesn't matter where they reside in. That's just who they like.
Right. But in states that are predominantly white, it happens way more. The majority of the black population is interracially reproducing. And that's not the case in even heavily diverse places. The majority of black people, even in the most heavily diverse place, are not creating admixtures. That's not, you're not going to walk into a black kids program and see 90% mixed people. That's not normal, right? That's not the norm. That's unique to these spaces with populations that are 90% and upwards white. There were two comments in the chat I wanted to read. Aisha said, white people are moving to these predominantly white places to get away from black and Latinos. Oh, wait, from blacks. Latinos are moving there because they want to elevate their status as white. Let me start that over. Aisha said, white people are moving there to get away from black. Latino are moving there because they want to elevate their status as white. Black people are moving there because they want to be the special Negro. And on the heels of
Token nigger.
I'm sorry?
The token nigger. The token.
Well, he said the special Negro. Armadeus, that is a name I don't hear very often, says, let's be real. Nobody is having an exodus anywhere until Elon Musk takes folks to Mars. We are all human. The concept of keeping it black is flawed, just as the concept of keeping it white. What do you guys have to say to those two comments?
Well, I want to say to the other topic on point of, in regards to, you know, the children, what they decide to do if they come from two black parents. Do they stay in this black pool or they go into the recessive white pool? And by default, because they look at where they could fit better in society, because society is structured, you know, because we don't run this, that everything white is right, white is purity, all that stuff, they're going to shy more to the white side and procreate white by default, you know, because they're going to see one thing with children, and you should know this better, Irene, they very much take presence to their environment. And if they see that it go through any sense of abuse per se, depending how the abuse they take it. And let's say they're mixed, they'll know that they're going to put in a certain label in the box. So one of two things will happen. One, either they overcome that challenge or where abuse they suffer from other non-blacks, or they sit there and simulate and say, maybe it's better if I go more geared to this side because it's safer. Because by nature and by humans, they don't like to take constant abuse or any type of stress or trauma. They find ways to get around it or try to alleviate that stress. So that's how I see it.
Mr. What do you think about Aisha's assessment of why Black, Latinos, and whites choose to move to those spaces? Whites to get away from Blacks, Latinos to upgrade their status as white, and Blacks to be the token Negro. And what do you think about Armadeus's comment about the fact that we're not going to have any exoduses, and at the end of the day, keeping it Black or keeping it white is flawed because we're just all people?
Well, I'll start with the last one first. I mean, the humanistic, viewpoint that Amadeus said, it's ideal, but it's not the reality. I agree with him on it not being, there won't be an exodus because that just won't happen. And I think there is, on an interpersonal level, there's a lot of people that agree with him, like, hey, people are people, and we're humans. But when we look at structural racism, we know that racism works through different dynamics, and it keeps things in place, and it forces these types of conversations and realities of it being, these white states that were formulated this way to keep people of color, in particular Black people, out of these states. Lash laws.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because Babe, can you expound on that? Because I don't think everybody knows how that was created.
Yeah. So when we look at some of these states in the greater Pacific Northwest, it's kind of it's misleading on one hand. So they weren't abolitionists, but they opposed slavery, but they didn't want any Black folks to be in their state. And even within their constitution, even in their laws, I mean, so if you were like in the certain part of the city, they had lash laws where you received lashes. And you would get these if you were seen until you basically left that particular state.
So you would be beaten, is what you're saying, is that they would beat Black people on sight until they left the state.
Yeah, and you were relegated to a particular part of the state or city. And so, they had, particular camps, tent cities, as they call them, where Black folks had to stay because they couldn't, not that they didn't have the money to, but it was against the law. It was illegal for them to purchase homes and everything in these certain, states and cities. And these type of situations that are facts, right, still have, remnants today. So that's why you have a lot of states in the, Great Pacific Northwest that is not very diverse because of these, of these laws and policies and procedures that really, kept Black folks out on the books. And so you fast forward to 2019, going into 2020. Now, when they use the term, we need to diversify, equity, inclusion, all these terms that they throw out that are politically correct, but we know these particular states are undergirded with a history that is exactly counter to what they are saying now. So they know this. They say, "Oh yes, we know. We're trying to do better and everything." And my point is like, okay, I know your history, and I know that all of you all don't really mean what you're saying. However, with me knowing this, I know it's still some of our black brothers and sisters who are here who are catching hell. What can we do for them? Because I believe, like the young brother said, that there's not going to be an exodus. And if it is, you know, there's always going to be some. Now, I agree with you on this point right here. If there's the few that token black and everything that know what it is and know how it is, and they still want to stay here despite the realities of what's to come, then they should be on their own. But speaking of the babies here, you know, the people who are a little bit more, uh, little bit more looking to make a change within, or a small change, right? To help the black brothers and sisters and the babies in particular, then they should be afforded the opportunity to do that, you know. But if there's going to be an exodus, I think black folks need to really have what we call what those come to Jesus meetings, and then we all should be out. But I don't think that's going to be the case.
I have to say to the we're all human thing, I agree. We are all human, okay? And in a perfect world,
Everyone doesn't view us as human.
Right. In a perfect world, we would not be having these conversations. But and nobody like y'all, I grew up in the hate. I was a hippie for a period of time, literally. Nobody understands the we are human argument better than I, okay, who grew up in San Francisco amongst hippies. But what I can say is this: to apply an ideology that is that is detached from a reality that was not a creation of our own as Black people, and to try to function in the world as though there are not real issues and baggage that come from the status quo. To say we're all human, but today I could fly out of the United States and go off the coast of India and go view Black people on a human safari like animals, or to say that we're all human and ignore the fact that just 40, 50 years ago, Australia finally just ended its government sanctioned theft of children and breeding out of Black people, then we are completely ignoring reality. So I agree with the we're all human attitude, but unfortunately we cannot function like that because we still have to correct egregious things that are happening right now. Right now we can go to Fiji and see the oppression of the Black people there. Right now we have Black people being shot in their home and that not being problematic. Right now the price of a Black life is 5 to 10 years. That's what a Black life is worth in our own country. So I think whilst I completely agree with you in principle, I had to reach a place as a person that came from perhaps one of the most liberal places in the country and from one of the most liberal neighborhoods, second only to the Castro, where the gays are, in that city. Like I came from the most liberal state, in the most liberal city, in the second most liberal neighborhood in America. Okay. I had to learn that my experience and our unique experience there has nothing to do with reality of the planet at large. And we must deal with this reality before we start trying to move people to a new reality. We must deal with the baggage, both emotional and cultural, and the here and now before we can move on. I'm going to need to not have a Black human safari going on before I can talk about we're all people. You know, I'm going to need to not see people that look like me being photographed the way you would a lion today in 2019 before I can talk about the where we're all human beings argument, because I'm not the person that needs to understand that. It's these people who created the situation that need to understand that. And that's what I would say. That's what I would say to that. Can you also speak to Aisha's point that she believes that Blacks are moving to these neighborhoods to be the token Negro, whites are moving to these neighborhoods to get away from Blacks, and Latinos are moving to these, not neighborhoods, but states to uplift their positionality as white?
Yeah, real quick, I'll address that. Then we got a new guest. Want to hear from the brother. Um, I think some of that is true. I keep going back to, I can only speak to, about black folks, because I'm really not concerned with, the other people that she talked about. I'm really focusing on us, right? And so some of us do that. Again, I cannot say that some of us are really, have this. So Dr. Amos Wilson says it this way, everything has to be backwards, right? In order for black people to be in the condition that we're in, we have to, left has to be right and right has to be left and up has to be down. So we view white folks as being, like I said before, their ice always being cooler. We want to associate with them by any means necessary because we view them as, some of us want to have this mimetic relationship with them. We see them as the people that we want to become. And yes, that is true. Of some people, they go to these states because yes, they're trying to emulate whiteness and they hate their own blackness. But again, that's not that's not all of the individuals who do this, but I believe there's some. And I think the ones who don't, align with this ideology, they get caught up in that because now anyone who's in a position like this become pathologized. They become the sellout. It's like, wait a minute, why are you over here with all them white folks? It's like, okay, I'm trying to help some of the brothers and sisters here. No, you just skinning and grinning from the white folks. And again, I go back to the spook who sat by the door. He wore the mask that grinned and lies. He did all he could do while he was in, working um, within that institution, right? Within the framework. But then what did he do? Went back to his people, and it was more radical than anyone else. I mean, actually taking, sometimes you have to take some of your own people out to, really push the needle forward. So I think her statements are true, and particularly when we talk about black people. But again, it's not a global statement, but unfortunately it happens too often.
Good. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. When I first saw the title, the first thing that came to my mind is, are we providing safe and productive places for black people? And when I say that, there's this narrative that every time a black person gets a good job or become a professional, or gets a certain level amount of money, they want to move out of the black neighborhood and go to a white neighborhood because they say, hey, get out of the ghetto. But the question is, if we don't want to be in the white neighborhoods, are we creating black neighborhoods that are productive, safe, and self-sufficient? So that's always the key when you go between, whether you believe it or not, that's how most black people are taught. You start making $50,000, $100,000 a year, okay, get out of the black neighborhood. But is that correct? Some people agree, some people disagree. One of my first videos I ever did on YouTube was about a football player from the San Diego Chargers. He moved to LA, and a lot of the black players was trying to find a place to live. And they was encountering a lot of racism. And here's the guys who are making multi-millions of dollars a game. And I said, why can't you put your money together, buy some land and build some homes? And then you have black people that are just like you, professional, that live around each other instead of trying to go somewhere you're not wanted. So there's a lot of variables to the situation. So that's the first thing that came in mind when I saw the title.
Like the brother just said, there are so many variables in place, and I think it's difficult for us just to judge an individual that may be thrusted or may have chosen to be in a situation where they're minoritized, right? Where they're in a situation where it appears as if they may be sellouts, right? But again, their work and actions will determine if that's the case. So I think we need to give these individuals the benefit of the doubt And if they're not trying to ever collaborate with their people, if they're never trying to break bread with the young brothers and sisters to try to give them, or having these bi-directional conversations where like they're listening to the young brothers and sisters and they don't necessarily know it all. They're making sure that they get opportunities. You know what I mean? They're just not worried about themselves. It's not just a me thing, it's a we thing. So those individuals, I think we need to really, give them the benefit of doubt and give them opportunity to really see if they're on some selfish, you know, um, sellout stuff, or only on some real, like, okay, I'm in the space, but that hasn't changed who I am as far as helping my young brothers and sisters or my old brothers and sisters. I'm not in this ivory tower now just so I could placate and talk, using $15 words in front of white folks just to have them skin and grin. But I'm actually helping, the brothers who catching hell, the sisters who catching hell on a daily basis. I'm actually seeing them. I'm actually going to where they are. I'm actually going to the schools where they're catching hell. And see, that's a different conversation because you have a lot of people who are hired in these positions. They're hired to do exactly what they're hired to do. And that's not a damn thing. They're hired there just as a token, just as, you know, as the optics. You have, oh, I heard this black person with this PhD, and they go in there and they don't relate to any other black people. As a matter of fact, they turn their noses up at them and they're trying to distance themselves from the other black people. But again, you have some of us who don't do that. But I think, unfortunately, we all get typecast as the same when we enter into this realm, and I think that's unfair.
Also, the ghetto is a place that we don't choose to live there. That's a place that people have to live. So I think if we start cleaning up our neighborhoods and making them better places to live, then it would be more attractive to our people. Because on the one hand, the only reason why I believe black people would move to a predominantly white area is to get away from areas that they just left when they were growing up. Maybe high crime areas, maybe places where you have some of the houses is falling apart, or you may have a drug infested area. Those are the areas that we don't choose to live. That's a situation that either we put ourselves in or society put ourselves in. But if we would clean up those neighborhoods, not only from a physical level, but as far as a social level, it would be more attractive to a black person, no matter how much money they made a year, whether they made 20,000 or 70,000. If we clean up what we have, then I think that conversation would become smaller. Then the people who just want to go out there and move in a predominantly white area, then you'll know what they're about. They won't have a reason to be like, hey, I'm trying to get out the hood. Well, our neighborhoods are good now. Our homes are good. It's a low crime place now. You know what I'm saying? It's a better place to live. So if you go out there, that means you don't want to be around black people. But until we do that, you're going to have black people. They're just naturally going to be like, hey, I'm moving to Bel Air. Hey, I'm moving to Wallwood or something. That's the mind state that people are in. So.
That's so interesting. I'm sorry, mister. Were you going to say something?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on what the brother said, about cleaning up our own neighborhoods and everything. That reminds me of, when I was in California and the neighborhood I grew up in, it was a predominantly black neighborhood. Of course, that's changed over time.
Mexican.
Yep. Way more Mexicans now. But be that as it may, when I was living in that neighborhood, I try to do exactly what the brother was saying. We talk about the hood, like KRS One said, but what do we bring the hood that's good? So what are we doing in our neighborhoods to actually clean it up? And I'm not just talking about physically cleaning it up, but I'm talking about cleaning it up, mentally, spiritually, so on and so forth. What are we doing? And so I remember a time I did something was stupid. But again, I'm always thinking about the babies in our community. So it was broad daylight, and typically they don't do this, but it was a whole bunch of young brothers in the park and everything, and they were having a gang initiation. Now usually they have it at a disclosed area, at night, somewhere like that. And stupid me, and this was very stupid. You know, I drive up on the park grass like I'm the popo or something, and I'm like, hey, yeah, brothers, y'all need to, you know, school about to get out, y'all need to stop this. You know, a couple of the BGs came up and be like, who are you? And luckily, I knew one of the OGs. He went to school with me. He was like, hey, man, you just need to get out of here, because you know they was coming up on me. But I say that to say this: that was stupid, right? Because I could have got lumped up, or I would have had a couple of them. But it was more than it was more than them than it was of me. But I say that to say this: we need to make sure we're doing things that advocate for our community. I'm not suggesting anybody do that, because that was stupid, and I got out of it, you know, fortunately. But we need to make sure we're standing up and standing up for our community, doing things. Since we do a lot of talking, but when it comes to actually physically doing something, or going to meetings and advocating for, you know, our brothers and sisters, doing things on their behalf, we're quick.
What happened? What happened?
Be there, but we're quick.
Babe, oh, okay. I think he's handling his computer. He does not have a Mac like me. But
I
just, do you really? Yeah, he has
for 400. This ain't
yeah, he has a PC too, but I only use Mac. So his is always glitchy with the internet.
I just want to say one more thing quick. He brought out a good point. He couldn't even tell the brothers to do the right thing before it turned into a fight. So first, we got to get out of the mentality to be aggressive to each other just because we're trying to tell each other to do something right by the neighborhood. See, that's one of the reasons why black people move out right there, because you can't even tell no one to do the right thing without it being a fight. So we need to change our mentality first before we even get to that point. But it is a good discussion. I mean, if I can't tell you, hey, what are you guys doing in this yard? Or what are you guys doing in the neighborhood? And all of a sudden you're ready to roll up on me. Then guess what? It's not going to change.
Well, I think it's interesting the point that you were making about us creating spaces where Black people who have had some sort of financial accomplishment will want to move. And even the idea of what you're just saying about being able to or inquire about a behavior without it becoming a violent situation. It's just so interesting to me, because white our areas, they do exactly that. With their money, without anybody cleaning it up for them. We call that it's something we're unwilling to do for ourselves. We have an expectation that the poor should do something to incentivize us coming into their neighborhoods and making them better. See that as an opportunity to buy cheap land and make a neighborhood what they wanted to make. And the next thing you know, you've got a Whole Foods. That thought process is interesting, how we view poor Black neighborhoods.
Starbucks too.
What did you say, Chaos?
And a Starbucks too.
Have a Whole Foods and a Starbucks or Pete's Coffee, right? Also, I think this idea that, you know, Black very, and I'm going to say respectful, although people might argue against that, white authority. So we respect the police in that we don't cross them openly, right? Black people will run, they'll listen, they'll do anything, but they're not going to fight the police. But when Black people try to care for their own, then we will beef with each other. That is interesting, how we view the dynamic between rich and poor amongst our own versus how white people see poor Black neighborhoods as opportunity, right? Black neighborhoods as opportunity. We see poor Black neighborhoods when we get our money as a place to move out of or to be away from. And I have to say this too, since I've been with Mr., that has changed, because for me, you know, I grew up in San Francisco, and then I would always live in planned communities. And those planned communities, although California is very diverse, would have small Black populations. Where I live now, it's very diverse, but there are way more Black people that live in my neighborhood than ever I've lived in my whole life. And it's actually really nice. And I thought, well, I didn't do this on purpose because, the place it was sight unseen, so I didn't know when, I was moving out of the mountains, that's what was going to happen. But the thing is that it's actually really nice. And the neighborhood is a beautiful neighborhood. And there are Black people here, and they're not, super affluent. They're working class Black people who are homeowners. And there is diversity, don't get me wrong, but there's a lot of, even my daughters were like, there are a lot of Black people here. And I was like, oh my goodness, what environment have I had them in where they were like surprised that you can't turn a corner, right? Or walk out the door and not see another Black face. But I think more of us have to strive, and earlier in life than I did. And obviously my proximity to Mr. has helped this. We have to strive to view our poor people and our poor neighborhoods as an opportunity and not as a group of people that need to incentivize us, want to be bothered with self-gentrifying their areas. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Oh, hi, Dark Prophet. But yeah, what do you think about, I'm curious about what we were talking about earlier with regard to when states are predominantly white, whether or not we should be encouraging the Black people there to remain there so that they can be present for the small Black population that is there, versus encouraging them to leave these predominantly white states, states with 95 to 99% white people, to move to places where there are more Black people. Like, what do you think
You're talking to
is a better approach? I'm talking to you. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I agree with that. The first thing, I think we're too spread it out, number one. So I think as a community, as a whole, we're too spread it out. I don't think we seek each other out enough. And when I say that, it's nothing wrong with trying to find somebody that's compatible with you. If you don't want to be around someone in a certain income bracket, that's your choice. But at least try to be around some Black people. I think that's the problem. We're not looking for each other enough. And then when we see each other, say I'm new, then somebody may throw their head up and keep walking, or they may not say anything to you at all because they don't know you. So if you're moving into an area that doesn't have a lot of Black people, and those Black people aren't linking up together, then pretty much you're going to remain as is. You're not going to be able to grow, build, and network with each other. So that's another issue. We treat each other like strangers, but yet we're all in the same boat. So if it's an area that doesn't have a lot of Black people, I think what we should start doing more, the same suggestion that I made before on another live stream, is when you go to state by state. So I live in the Kansas, Missouri area. When I go to Missouri, and I'm going to be there for a while with my sister, I always look to see what Black businesses are there. So if I need something, I can go there first. So because I want to know what Black businesses is there and how are people living. And if I need something, or if I want to link up with somebody, then I'm doing with another Black person. But we have to do that first.
I want to address Carl's opinion said, here's a solution to what Mr. and Yakov were talking about. Allow the cops to come into these neighborhoods and do these bangers the same thing. I think do to these bangers the same thing that they were about to do to Mr. without his friend's intervention. And I think the problem with that, but I want Mr. and Yakov to speak on this.
Yeah, let him go first.
Yeah, go. Let Mr. go first. I think the problem with that is that when we have police officers shooting Black people in their own homes, that it then becomes a death sentence to invite them into Black communities to do police work, right? Because you're not protecting a certain point, you could become the victim of violence. So, you know, with that young lady, she saw somebody on her property, on her family's property, attempted to pull a weapon, likely to protect herself. That's what weapons are for, and ended up dead. So I think that's the problem with bringing the police in. If they knew how to do their job, then I think we could utilize the police as many other communities do. But unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing. Even people calling the police can end up in situations where their lives are in danger and they were just calling for protection. So
are they going to differentiate between the two? Or are they just going to see a Black person and be like, oh, okay, I'm going to do to him what I want to do to all Black people? Are they going to differentiate the good ones from the bad ones, if that's an even term, or even a term we should use? You know what I'm saying? Are they going to differentiate one from the other?
Well, I wouldn't. So I appreciate him saying that, but I wouldn't never call. You know, I mean, we're already living in a police state. You know,
Right.
So I wouldn't call them on my brothers. So here's the caveat to that. You know, so in that community, at that particular, well, years prior, we used to have genuine Black police officers that lived in the community. And what I mean by genuine is they weren't there showing up for the white cops. They were actually vested in the community. They were there, you know, to really sort out some of those, you know, white supremacist police officers who would come into our community, and they still are, to do harm. So I wouldn't risk that to have, you know, to put all of our lives in peril by having these, you know, potential rogue police officers come in there and do. I mean, we're already, you know, they already militarized themselves, come in there and take over our communities and everything. And like Irene alluded to, I mean, there's a real peril in that. I mean, if you look at Jonathan Farrow, who was just knocking on the door after surviving a car accident, and they shot him on sight, right? I mean, we have so many examples of these type of things. In particular, we're talking about Black males. So I think, you know, calling the police would have done more harm than good. And that's a horrible thing to say, but that's the reality of we as Black folks. I mean, who looks out for, who looks over the police? You know what I mean? Who's policing the police? Nobody. I mean, so it's a system of white supremacy that allows them to constantly, you know, exterminate us. You know, and we see this on a day-to-day basis. So even though, you know, I was fortunate, you know, in my intervention and my OG partner intervening, I still would. I mean, even after it occurred, I didn't call the police. I talked to the Black City Councilman and say, "Hey, listen, we need to do something different." You know what I mean? And I don't know what that is, but no, I didn't want to have them come in there because that would have done more harm than good. So I appreciate the brothers trying to look out for my best interests, but I don't think calling the police would have been that. And again, if I would have spoken to the police, it would have been one of the brothers, you know, that I knew from, you know, from the masjid and everything, that grew up with me in the community, who was a down brother, who knows what's going on in our community. But I wouldn't just call any random police officer. I wouldn't have done
that. Yeah, that's true. At this point in time, I don't want to call him for anything, almost. So.
Yeah. I unfortunately, I think it's unfortunate, but I think that's the reality that, and I think it leaves us vulnerable, right? Because on one hand, if we try to self-police in our own community, we refuse to respect the authority of our men when they're trying to correct and keep the community safe. On the other hand, the social police system that's put in place is not reliable for us in our communities. especially, and this is not just in Black neighborhoods, right? This is especially true for those of us who live in slightly more affluent neighborhoods. It's almost even more dangerous for us to call the police because it's not believed that we're supposed to be there. So you don't know if you're going to be viewed as the intruder, right? Or as the problem if an issue were to occur in those neighborhoods. Chaos, do you want to chime in on this?
Hold on. Well, like I said, Irene, in regards to how we acculturate our children in this society, I feel dependent on the bond and relationship you have with your children, the only thing you can leave in your hands is that they will do what's right. And if you are preaching, Blackness, the importance of why we're Black, history, they should make their own conclusions how they should operate in society. I feel with this society, when in dealing with us, we don't preach or teach our culture, or not culture, but the history enough of not only this country, but us in the world to enough for our children. We leave that to the school or the educational system to do all that. And you see the result of all this, what we see play today. And I can see it continuing as time progresses. So yeah. These children are gonna eventually water down the genetics in the society because the society is now pushing and promoting more than ever. Hell, you see in certain television, which a lot of people should stop watching, that the image alone, they pushing out the Black woman or Black female to non-Black men now because they got to start speed this up, this amalgamation, this watering down this so-called browning or whitening of America in the next 30 to 40 years. They're behind schedule right now, so they gotta speed it up. That's how I see it moving forward. If they want that prediction of the 2053 of what people are gonna look like in this country.
Well, I can just say for me, like, kind of my final word on this is for Black people that are living in areas that are predominantly white, and I'm speaking whole states, right? So not necessarily neighborhoods, but if you are in a state that is predominantly white, when we are talking about how we should approach the Black populations in those states, I would say that any interaction that we have with them should be encouraging them to leave the state. And I feel that although I understand Mr.'s feelings about how we have to have a supportive network for them there, and I don't disagree with that, I also feel that encouraging them to stay in those spaces effectively creates a disproportionate population of people who will no longer be Black after 1 or 2 generations. And we see that because Mr., who does work in spaces like this, which is why we were talking about this before we came online to discuss it with all of you, is that then when we do have a program for Black people, we are seeing that, 70, 80, even 90% of the children aren't actually Black, right? They are mulatto, they are quadroon, they are octoroon. They could be very passable as white if they didn't say that they were Black. And so effectively, I feel that when we tell them to stay, we are acknowledging that if we go back in 2 generations, their representation in the Black population will be non-existent. And so I feel that is counterproductive and that we should be encouraging our people to leave those spaces, especially with consideration of the history, because as Mr. was saying, a lot of these states are predominantly white because of actual laws that although they were not slave-holding states, they didn't want Black people there. So they were anti-slavery, but they were also anti-you being present. And as in the example he gave, there were even laws where you would be beaten if you were seen to try to force you to leave the state because it would be so violent right? For you to be there. You would always have to worry about your personal safety. They weren't throwing you out, but they were effectively making it so you wouldn't want to stay. And keep in mind that the Black people that are present in these states are bred from a stock of people who chose to live under these conditions. Because we had that one incident, Mr. Remember, Mr. did a symposium of sorts, and he invited a Black political figure, right? Somebody that's currently in office. And when this particular person was speaking about his feelings on Trump, now this is somebody that's representing Black people in government, right? We had an old Black man, so an old white man, stand up and get very upset, right? But what was more shocking, because remember, they pretend to be very liberal and progressive there. What was more shocking is that an old Black man, equal in age to the old white man, stood up to defend the white position. And that is the stock of Black person that is overwhelmingly produced in these places. They are either completely pandering to whiteness, or they create an environment where their children and their grandchildren will, by the time they have grandchildren, they won't even be Black people. So what are we maintaining would be my question. If people stay there, we're not maintaining anything. It's a place that breeds weak minds and non-Black people.
No, but that's the whole part of why most of the people either they were born in there in those environments, or they decided just to leave away Black people. They intentionally want that because, like I said, and I did a stream on this Irene on my own channel about, well, actually no, it's actually on a show on another channel which I'll upload sometime maybe next week, about Black people see themselves as the devil. They look into less of them, they're evil, and that feel that there was a mistake they being in this earth being Black. So what they will do what's necessary to change that, whether they have to cut their face open with surgery, bleach their skin, or even go as far as change their whole entire genetic makeup by breeding out their genes with non-Black people. I mean, these are the stages of death in my mind, and I see them implement and carrying out right now in front of our eyes. So the ones that, like you said, trying to push them away from those states, it sounds great, it sounds nice, but that's not a possibility. Because if they really hold sacred of what their essence are of being Black, they were left on their own accords. Just by being around people that don't like them, suffering the abuse, not only verbally, physically, or wherever case may be, they will not stay there. They would just pack them, gone. They would have made their little money and gone somewhere else. But because they see that they're lesser than because of the condition, they will do what's necessary to become white, even go as far as erasing their genes altogether. That's how I see it.
Does anybody else have like final thoughts on this?
I think the conversation, it's important, but it kind of went to mixing Blacks and non-Blacks, but I understand it's still headed at that same production. But what do you think about people like Maxine Waters, right? I once went to her school for medicine. It was like for her to be a registered nurse in LA. And during that time in the early 90s, she was all about helping Black people. And then now she's flipped to someone about helping immigrants. She's not really from an affluent background. She came from humble roots, and she still turned around, and now she's becoming not pro-Black at all. So we have a problem with people that are from white neighborhoods, is Black, trying to be white. We got a problem with people leaving the ghetto and then becoming affluential and then still being anti-Black. But I think there's always going to be a lot of Black people, Black being two Black parents around. And I think the first thing we have to do is address how our standard of living must change and how we have to police each other up. Like the gentrification talk, you was right about that, Irene. If you really look at it, It's really not gentrification. It's them taking advantage of coming in, buying low-income homes and buildings. When the first thing we do, we don't organize our money together. We don't do group economics and buy these older homes that people are reneging on, or that you can get in real estate very cheap. We're not really trying to rebuild and buy the neighborhood. I remember being from Central and Rosecrans early in my years, before I left around 6 years old, and went back around 20, and the whole neighborhood was Latino. And I remember the 1 or 2 families that was there. And what they do, they come in, put 10 people in the house, everybody start working, they'll fix that house, they'll buy up another. See, they organize financially and socially. And then that's how they're able to, they do the same thing. The Hispanics do the same thing to Black neighborhoods as white people do. They're able to go in and buy it because they're socially and economically smart. They're trying to buy you out so they can have those neighborhoods for themselves. But you can't really, it's hard to fault them legally. But the first thing we do, like, which is the point of this actual show, we get money and then we move out. We move to a bigger and better place.
And not like these people are buying their own homes when they move out. They sometimes go on renting, or wherever the case may be, when they go to another community or community. So really, you're not really building no wealth at all. You're not even keeping even with home ownership, with some of these dilapidated neighborhoods, with the housings now being more cheaper than they are. You think that would be the first move a lot of people that, let's say, is financially stable or doing pretty good will start doing, but they're not doing that. They're going elsewhere with a resource. And they notice that when you go elsewhere, now you have to placate to somebody else's community where you're making their community still fruitful and rich because you spend the money in their area.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
But their numbers, the Hispanic and white numbers in what used to be Black areas, it's because they're actually being economically smart and they're combining their resources together to do that. That was my point of it.
Yes, that's what they're doing, and that's what they're doing right now. So when people complain about the gentrification, and it's bad, but at the end of the day, you know, this is on our backs because people know what's going on. You know, they see what's going on. It's like this. If you're a Black person, you never seen a Caucasus or a non-Black person since you've been growing in this neighborhood, and you see him walking the dog and all stuff and think it's a good thing, you are sadly mistaken. They just coming in to slowly push you out into other areas. You know?
And pretty soon we're not going to have no area to go to except back to the hood if we don't change.
Yeah. Ms. Ryder Dye said, brother, I lived in the projects all my life and I couldn't save a dime. Why am I paying $1,200 for the project? So, yeah, you can.
Are you renting?
I can.
You ready? Hold on. Before we continue.
Well, she's in the projects. So,
projects, on the house, you're renting.
Yeah, I think if she's talking about the projects, that would be.
So she's a renter.
And she went on to say a 3-bedroom house in New York is almost $400K. That's really cheap. $400K, man, you could not get much in California. Not you're talking about in New York. Maybe in the suburbs of Cali, you might be able to find something for $400K.
The projects was not set up by us. So
exactly.
And so technically, she shouldn't be paying that much for it. But of course, if you don't have a choice until you can do better. But that's what I was saying about Black people need to invest in wealth and start building their own homes. I mean, you have homes right now built out of 10-foot containers. I mean, you have prefab homes that you can create this cheaper. There's stuff we can do, but we're gonna have to put our money together, our wealth together. We're gonna have to purchase that land. We got to build them homes. If not, go in and buy older homes and fix them up. It's one of the two. But the project thing, I understand it. I'm from the projects. So until I was able to do better and to go into a regular neighborhood, you know, that's what I had to do. But those projects and hood, they're not set up by us. That's set up by the dominant society.
And not only that, brother, I'm gonna say this. to all the men and women that sitting there, you got to make a decision, make a choice. Either you want to be a renter or a home owner. And that's a process that you have to make that decision. If you're a renter, this is what you'll expect, especially in environments that we don't control, especially projects that was really not designed for Black people. You know, that's why they price out a lot of Black people in those ghettos, so they get them out and give to the people that should be in there for a lesser price. Because there's when you're the boss and you own something, you dictate who stays, who goes by raising rent. It's that simple. You know?
I think we could do a whole separate live on preservation of money when you live in major cities. Even living in essentially poverty in major cities is very expensive. Now, she went on to say she moved down south and is now a homeowner. And that would be my advice, is to get out of those areas.
Definitely.
I think also,
eventually most Black people are going to leave those cities anyway, because they're going to price them out anyway. So
Right.
most people,
Yeah.
that was a one time, was in the South, then had to leave the South because of terrorism, from racism. Go out to deal with terrorism, face on back south now. There's no way around. And I think about it. Why do you think that a lot of people, why would most of our grandparents or anybody else here, left south, come up north? It's not just the job, but they got pushed out because the white racists were going to kill them out their homes. Because they know the value of home ownership, especially down south, where cheap is. So now it's going to be a point where most of our grandparents are left to have a better life for our safety. We're going to have to face that trouble head on back down south again. Well, it's going to be a dogfight now. And they know this. They know Black people come back down south now. So, yeah.
I think when you're in positions like that, definitely moving out of the area makes sense. But also, I feel like we do spend our money on things that could go towards saving. So a lot of times we don't think about eating out or buying candy or buying coffee or paying a cable bill, right? Or having the most unlimited plan available on your phone. We don't look at those things as drains on our money, but they actually are. And so if you can't immediately move out of those situations, I think a lot of savings can come from reevaluating how you're spending your money. Also, I think that, and the Midtown Pookie is saying living down south is no different than Cali or New York coast. The cost of living fits the income you make. And I agree with that. I know I view a lot of things as cheap, but the reality is for the people living there, they're also making less money. It's when you bring that East Coast, West Coast money to places that are less, expensive to us, that then the cost of living seems cheap. But definitely if you're already in that environment, then wages do fluctuate for the cost of living. And so it really ends up not making a difference at the end of the day. But for us transplants, it is cheap.
Actually, yes, there is a gap between the payments. But for example, I'm currently in Topeka, Kansas. My wife, we're separated. She's in San Diego. So she's paying $1,200 for a 2-bedroom and mine is $450. So now the deal is, because I'm retired, I have a fixed amount that I'm getting anyway. So it doesn't do me any good, just like someone who owned a business. It wouldn't do you any good to move to an expensive area. If you could compete in a smaller area with business that way, then you could have a cheaper place to live, whether you were renting, buying, whatever you were doing. So to me, it does kind of matter, even though the cost of living situation is that way. But like the brother said, eventually people are going to start moving down south, and they're just going to be able to deal with the cost of living thing. They'll rather take the risk of that than to be paying $1,200-1,300 for a 2-bedroom.
Yeah, I think it also depends on your industry. If your income won't change, especially if you are from the far east or west coast, a lot of us work remotely and our income won't fluctuate no matter where we go because we were already working remotely. So sort of like he was saying with his fixed income, it doesn't make sense to be someplace more expensive because his money will go farther in some areas. That goes the same for people who work remotely. And that's why we also have to change as Black people what we feel are marketable and realistic skills for us to have. Because, for example, if we start branching out into areas like computer programming, design, robotics engineering, things like that. I'm sorry?
Or STEM.
Yes. Things like that, then we'll have more flexibility where we move, and then we don't have to be dependent upon the incomes and the relative places that we move to. We can take our high income jobs to places where people earn less, and our money will reach so much further. So a lot of this is about being pragmatic. So many of us are tied to the major cities in particular areas, and it's not really pragmatic for us to be there because it is harder to get ahead on that same dollar. Now, this is relative to the industry, right? This is not going to be applicable for all people, but there are many of us that it is applicable for.
Yeah. Hey, Irene, I wonder if I could put my channel on your page.
Yeah, go ahead. Because I think you're a mod, aren't you?
Yeah, see, I wasn't sure I was a mod. I just noticed that.
Yeah, I think you're a mod, so you can just paste it in there. So yeah, subscribe to Chaos's channel, and any closing thoughts from you guys before we go?
I got a channel too now. Hold on.
Yes, we'll put your
on my channel. And Minister, if you have a channel, please post yours too.
No, but both of you guys are mods on my channel, aren't you?
Well, I'm a mod. So.
I think you both are mods on my channel, so you guys have the capability to put stuff in the chat.
And always, you know, people are watching this channel. There's almost 70. So I advise people like the video. Because we only have 37 likes and 2 dislikes. Surprisingly, I don't know why we have a dislike. I guess we have some swirlers of people that are mixed that don't like this message. So we don't care. Please like the video. Please. It's free.
Not mixed people. You're so wrong. Don't do that.
Listen, who else disliked this video? Come on, we're talking about some serious issue. We tell you, say, get out of those areas, man, for your safety, for your future, for your children. I know it's hard. I know Black people are hard-headed. I understand, but you can't be living in environments that's 95% non-Black. That's unacceptable. I won't even live in them areas.
Because
I live in an area the first thing I do, I find ways to move fast. I can't deal with certain things. Hell, that means those areas, those caucasoids are having engaged in, intercourse with animals. They're doing all type of things. They're living it free, their whole Eurocentric culture and comfortability and peace. Why I want intrusion that, I say, God bless you. You could have that area. You know what I'm saying? Live to your deepest desires. I won't live in them type of areas in the sodomite and animalistic manner. I will go somewhere else. Thank you very much.
I just wanted to close on my side with what Aisha said, which is it's simple as this. The majority of Blacks don't think big. We don't sacrifice for now for the betterment of the future, and I agree. I think we look at the small picture. I think we look at ourselves. I think we collectively, right, when we're talking about the whole of the Black community, don't consider how our individual action affects the greater Black community. And I think a lot of us are still in denial about the fact that we can be isolationists, when the reality is that our fates are intrinsically tied throughout the diaspora. So that's why I keep, because I'm so upset about it, I keep talking about the human safaris. My fate as an American Black person is intrinsically tied to the ability for somebody who might view me here to go somewhere else and view a person that looks like me the way you would an animal. That feeling like I just viewed one of them as an animal doesn't change because we're in a different environment. So my fate and that person's fate are tied together, whether I like it or not. And so I think, like Aisha's saying, we have to look at the big picture, both of what we do individually and what we do as what we do individually, and also what we do as people who are thinking about grand scale opportunity, like, you know, businesses we're going to open, decisions we're going to make as far as career, things like that. And Carl's got jokes. Carl says that since Kansas is 84% white and only 5% African American, based on probably what I was saying, because it's my assertion that 5% or anything under 10% is questionable, that you should move, Yakov. Carl, you are a whole entire mess tonight. Carl is doing the absolute most.
No, listen, that's not like that in Topeka, Kansas. So there's a lot.
Oh, okay, right, okay.
Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about.
He's in Topeka, Kansas, and his argument is there's a higher Black population. Carl's so messy. Carl just likes to be over here being messy.
There's a lot of Black people.
Mister, do you have any closing thoughts?
Well, yeah, my interpretation of what Aisha Washington said is more along the lines of my argument, as far as, you know, even though there may be a lack of Black folks in a particular state, right, we still need to look out for our brothers and sisters in that state. And so I'm still going to hold on to that thesis, because I mean, people played it for us. Our ancestors did the same thing when we were few in numbers. You know, they made the situation easier for us to navigate in those spaces. So for me, I just think it's obligatory for me to do the same thing, to make sure, you know, each one teach one type of thing, make sure we're reaching down and helping our young brothers and sisters, and helping our older brothers and sisters too, in these spaces where we are minoritized. So I want to hold to that thesis, because I think it's absolutely necessary.
All right. Let me see. In my closing remarks, and I didn't give one earlier, that, you know, be good to yourself, Black people. You know, I know life is rough and it's going to get hard for us, but if you stay positive and keep pushing on, be productive, we'll get out of this. You know, take this information, you know, apply it. You know, if you like it, good. If you don't like it, you know, just, you know, let's move on. You know, but please just learn something from this channel. Thank you.
Yakov, did you put your channel in the chat?
Yeah, I put it in the private. That's it.
Oh, you put it in the private chat. Well how is that? I'm irritated that you. Why would you do that? Wait, I'm gonna put it in the YouTube chat. Okay.
Yeah, you can put it in the YouTube cap. I just did it and I wasn't thinking about it.
Okay, that's okay. I'll put it in there. So be sure to subscribe to both Yakov and Chaos's channels. And Carl, I'm glad you showed up to be messy per usual. Carl only shows up for the shows he thinks are going to be the messiest. He's just a messy person. And I think that's just all some food for thought. So thank you guys so much for coming up. Mr. is always engaging me in the middle of the night in these conversations. And today I managed to convince him to bring it on. I was like, say nothing further. Say nothing further. But let's take it to YouTube, because I felt like this is something that we don't talk about often, which is the plight of Black people in areas with very small Black populations, and, you know, how we should approach supporting those people. And I don't think we came to a consensus here, but that's okay. I will just say that I think I'm right. So, yeah. So with that said, I will talk to all of you guys later. And thank you, gentlemen, for joining me. Thank you, Mr. as always, because he actually has a lot of stuff to do tomorrow. So he is really sweet. We definitely went over time for the second night in a row. So my apologies. Yeah. So bye, y'all.
Take care.
Good night.